Andrew Urquhart with you on the program today. Human curiosity is an interesting thing, isn't it? What's behind that door? What's in the box? What's behind the curtain? The only way that we're going to find out is if we look behind the curtain, if we open the box. The problem with this, and most jump scare horror is based on this premise, what if there's something scary in the box? What if there is perhaps something a little bit untoward behind that curtain? Hey, come on, let's find out together, right? That's what the government has said with their recent change in legislation to allow gene technology to go ahead. Are we opening the proverbial Pandora's box? Well, asking that particular question, we have Stephanie Worboys from the Maxim Institute. Stephanie, kia ora. Good morning. Thanks for your time today.
Good morning, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
I mean, this is a unusual one. It's a little bit of perhaps human nature. You know, maybe there's something really good in Pandora's box. And honestly, can we do a little bit of a Greek mythology refresher for those people that are still catching up on the metaphor? Tell us about Pandora and the dilemma she faced.
Yeah, well, Pandora was presented with a box and she was told that it contained hope, which in fact it did. But when she opened the box, she not only let out hope, she let out all kinds of disease, death, and suffering into the world, which she couldn't retract and bring back into the box.
So I suppose that is the nature of human endeavor. We take a risk. Sometimes that goes horrifically wrong. And to mix metaphors a little bit, and look, not criticizing your wonderful article, Stephanie, but this is perhaps a more fun wordplay metaphor. We try to get the genie back into the bottle when it comes to gene therapy, I suppose.
That is a clever metaphor. I wish I'd thought of it.
Exactly. So, I mean, that is a part of the problem. But explain to us what's I suppose what the concerns are with gene therapy and with the government's changes in legislation.
Well, I think there's quite a few concerns. First of all, what the government has announced is more of a sales pitch than an actual detailed legislation. And so they've told us that they're going to model the new legislation off of existing legislation in Australia and that they're going to create a regulator. And that has sort of come with the expectation that certain gene technologies will be exempted from the assessment and approval process, and so might just show up as marketable items pretty quickly. And then others will have sort of a streamlined process for assessment and approval. And so we don't really know what the standards are for the risk management or for approval, and we don't know which ones will be let out of the box right away. So there's mostly a sales pitch that other people are doing it, so let's not miss out. We don't want to be left behind. But there are some real risks to gene technology, and if it's not managed carefully, we could go to some places that we don't want to go, and we could let some things loose that we can't retract.
So just to interject there, so basically what you're saying is their risk management plan is, let's see what happens, eh?
Or they've said, it's been used safely elsewhere, but there's also been problems elsewhere. So I'm not sure any of this technology is at the point where we can really call it safe, because safe can take many, many years to determine.
And now, I suppose there's the challenge of this one, because you don't want to be too risk averse and left behind. I mean, taking risks is what is required for innovation, for entrepreneurship, stuff, and if everybody else is taking the risks, then we'll be in catch-up mode. Having said that, when it comes to gene technology, the flip side of that, the dark stuff that may be lurking in the corner of the box, that could have a devastating impact on our economy and some of the things we do quite well at the moment.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So some gene technologies have been widely studied elsewhere, and they've had some devastating effects. So in the U.S., the monarch butterfly is now considered endangered because the GM crops have destroyed their principal food source, which is the milkweed. And a lot of GM technologies, as far as agriculture is concerned, is they like to focus on creating herbicide-resistant crops. So that means that you you can plant the crop and then you can spray the herbicide and it will kill all the weeds around it, but the crop will remain viable and intact.
Yeah.
And what that happens to do is it kills the food sources of other things, which then goes on to kill more things that relied on those food sources. So in Europe and the UK, those heavily herbicide-resistant crops have destroyed weeds that fed invertebrates, that fed birds, and now they're looking at an estimated loss of 550 million birds across the continent, which has been linked to this technology.
And, of course, here in New Zealand, some endemic species here, which are not found anywhere else in the world. And for an unintended consequences to have an impact on our biodiversity, of course, would be devastating. Some of the concerns on this one, and the coalition governments had this accusation made by others as well, because the agricultural companies that would love us to have less restriction on gene technology, they're quite a big lobby group. They've got big pockets and bigger lawyers, honestly. Is this part of what may be happening here, do you think, Stephanie?
Well, it just might. I mean, the policy document and the media briefing pack that the government released really did emphasize that this will be good for our economy. And I mean, it might be good for some people, but it might not be so good for others, because a lot of these technologies will be patented, which means they will belong to the companies that are selling it to the farmers and to the people of New Zealand. And so there's already been problems in Africa with this sort of model, which I think New Zealanders should look into.
And who owns that technology? Where are the tax profits going at the end of the day? Yeah, usually multinational corporations. So in a way, it's kind of giving away some of our sovereignty to these multinational corporations, which I'm not sure is the wise thing to do. So we're taking all of the ecological risk and not even necessarily getting the economic benefit on that one.
Yeah, there's certainly that risk, and we should be attentive to that.
To circle back to my slightly sideways metaphor, is the genie out of the bottle on this one? Is it like, oh, well, gosh, this is happening in other parts of the world. You know, if it's not happening here, it's happening with our trading partners. It's going to get here sooner or later, one way or the other. We might as well front foot this.
You know, I fear that the genie might be out of the bottle, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing we can do to protect our environment or to take both the practical and moral precautions regarding the dangers of these technologies. I mean, we have kept all kinds of diseases out of our country because we've been careful. So I don't think it's impossible to maintain our ground if we really wanted to.
Is there a scenario where, because part of the problem here is twofold, really. It's the gene technology per se, but it's also the lack of safeguards. Is there a safe way of opening the box on this one? Is there a safe way of saying, you know, we're going to move forward, but we're going to look at international studies. We're going to do some studies in our own environment. We're going to have a timeline where we will introduce this safely, having explored the potential negative consequences. Is there a way forward that we could do that? And is there a political appetite for it?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a political appetite or not. And I think that's an interesting question that you asked, because there's more than one consideration at play. There's the safety of the technology itself. It's my belief that we actually don't have a good understanding of all the things we're risking, even with the ones that we consider to be safe. Yeah. So even if we could manage those, and possibly we could, but I think that would be farther down in the future, then there's also the human being to consider. Yeah. We often run farther past what our wisdom is ready for. And so even if we could, we still have to contain the urges that we have to do better, to run faster, to beat our neighbors. And so that's two variables there that are individually hard to keep in check, and trying to keep them both in check at the same time with new technology, I think, is a pretty hard ask.
And hey, it's not just the life cycle of the monarch butterfly or even the food chain of our native weka that is at risk here. There potentially unintended consequences which may affect human health and well-being. Certainly that has been the case in other parts of the world. That's, I suppose, the worst case scenario in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. So the latest, greatest gene editing technique is called CRISPR. And what that does is it tries to make precise edits to a specific area of the gene. But it has been shown to make unintended changes to the gene, and those are called off-target effects.
Yeah.
And so these off-target effects have included rearranging the gene, turning off cancer suppressor genes or tumor suppressor genes, and turning on certain genes that create cancers. Yeah. And in animals, one study found that it created cows that were intolerant, or were antibiotic resistant.
Okay.
And so we think we're doing something precise, but that might not actually be the case in every instance. And then once we start seeing these unintended consequences, they tend to multiply.
And hey, these sorts of issues, too big to gamble on. It's not just like, oh, let's have a go, number 8 wire it, roll the dice, see what happens.
Yeah.
Too much at risk in this regard.
That's right. I mean, some of these things we can't walk back. And so if we're going to take the risk, we need to be precautious. We need to pay more attention to the downsides than the upsides.
Hey, Stephanie, appreciate your comments on this. Fascinating article on this topic is going to be posted on the Maxim website a little bit later this week, maxim.org.nz. Thanks for starting the conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.